Welcome to our channel. Today, we have an incredible story that's sure to leave you speechless. What happens when a royal guard steps outside his usual duty to protect someone in need? You won't believe how one brave act of kindness unfolded right at Buckingham Palace. But before we dive into this jaw-dropping moment, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss tomorrow's special story. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. Stay tuned. This royal guard's unforgettable moment of compassion will melt your heart. On a sunny afternoon at Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was filled with excitement as tourists from around the world gathered to witness the iconic changing of the guard ceremony. The sun cast a golden hue over the grand palace walls, and the royal guards stood tall, unwavering, in their immaculate red tunics and towering helmets. They were the epitome of discipline and tradition, a living symbol of British pride. Among the guards was 28-year-old James Holt, stationed near the gates, his posture rigid and his eyes focused ahead. James had seen it all before. Every day, tourists would stop to marvel at the precision and stoicism of the guards, snapping countless photos while whispers of admiration spread through the crowd. But today, something felt different. A subtle tension hung in the air, something that James could not ignore. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a small group of tough-looking men hovering near an elderly man. The old man appeared dignified, dressed in a well-pressed blazer adorned with medals, a symbol of service and sacrifice. James's instincts kicked in. He knew the value of those medals. They represented years of service, courage, and duty. The men in the group were acting strange, laughing and jeering as they mocked the veterans' medals. One of the thugs stepped forward, flicking a medal with a grimy finger, disrespecting the old man in a way that James found infuriating. Despite his training, which dictated that guards should remain still unless there was an immediate threat, something inside James stirred. This wasn't just a disrespectful incident. It was an insult to a man who had given his life for his country. His jaw clenched and James's mind raced. Should he stand by and follow the rules, or should he act on his conscience? The decision came quickly. He couldn't stand by and do nothing. With a deep breath, James took a step forward, breaking formation, a move that was rare for a royal guard. The tourists gasped in surprise, unsure of what would happen next. James's voice, steady and commanding, filled the air as he addressed the group of men. "Leave him alone," he said, his eyes locking onto the leader of the gang. The tension was palpable, but in that moment, James stood firm, prepared to defend the elderly man, no matter the consequences. The men froze for a moment, clearly shocked that the royal guard had broken formation, a rare sight for any tourist. The leader of the group, a tall, burly man, sneered at James and took a step forward, clearly unfazed by the guard's calm yet powerful presence. "You talking to us?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. The rest of the gang stood behind him, sizing up James with a mix of curiosity and defiance. They had clearly expected nothing more than the usual silent guards who stood motionless day after day. But James wasn't backing down. James's voice, though calm, held an undeniable authority. "I'm asking you to let him pass," he repeated, his gaze never leaving the thug's eyes. The crowd around them had grown silent, watching the confrontation unfold. Some tourists lowered their cameras, sensing the tension in the air. James could feel the weight of the moment. He wasn't just protecting a veteran. He was standing up for what was right, defying the protocol that had kept him motionless for so long. The leader's smirk faltered for a second, a flicker of doubt passing through his eyes. His bravado started to wane, but he quickly regained his composure. "What's your problem, soldier boy?" He sneered again, his fists tightening. James, however, remained unshaken. He knew he had the upper hand, both in training and in principle. The tourists had gathered closer now, murmuring among themselves, clearly waiting to see how this would unfold. As the leader took another step forward, clearly trying to intimidate James, the guard stood his ground. He hadn't moved an inch, but every muscle in his body was tense, ready for any sign of aggression. The thugs hesitated. They were no longer sure of themselves. James's unwavering stance had shattered their false confidence. "Walk away," James said, his voice steady, but filled with quiet resolve. He could see the leader's hesitation now, and the other men shifted uneasily, clearly not prepared to face someone who wasn't afraid to stand his ground. With a final look of frustration, the leader muttered something under his breath and motioned for his friends to leave. As they turned away, the crowd exhaled in unison, the tension easing, and the situation diffused. Marcus, the elderly veteran, gave James a thankful look, his face softening in gratitude. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice filled with emotion. James simply nodded, offering him a reassuring smile. As the tourists resumed their camera clicks and whispers of admiration, James returned to his post. His posture was once again impeccable, his uniform perfect, but something had changed within him. He knew that today, he had done more than just follow protocol. He had chosen to protect what mattered most: respect, honor, and the courage to stand up for what was right. James stood there, unwavering, as the thugs slowly retreated, but the unease in his gut lingered. He had faced the group down, successfully diffusing a potentially violent situation with nothing more than his presence and words. Yet something told him that this wasn't over. The way the leader had looked at him, the venom in his eyes, it wasn't a challenge that would be forgotten easily. Marcus, still shaken but visibly relieved, adjusted his jacket as he stood by James, his face showing a mix of gratitude and concern. "They'll be back, you know," Marcus murmured almost to himself, but loud enough for James to hear. James glanced at the elderly veteran, who seemed far more composed than he had moments earlier. The fear had faded from his eyes, but it wasn't entirely gone. "I'll be ready if they do," James replied, his voice firm. As the two men stood in the middle of the courtyard, the crowd began to disperse, some whispering, some still catching their breath from the tension of the encounter. But James couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something bigger than he realized. He had broken formation, a cardinal sin for any royal guard. And for a moment, he questioned whether his actions had consequences he wasn't prepared to face. Minutes passed, but the unease inside him only grew. He had acted on instinct, on what he knew was right, but protocol was clear. No royal guard ever broke formation unless absolutely necessary. James wondered if his decision had caused ripples within the royal guard itself, ripples that could soon come back to haunt him. Suddenly, a voice broke through his thoughts. Ava Sinclair, one of his fellow guards, approached him with an air of urgency. She motioned for James to follow her, her face unusually serious. "The captain wants to see you," she said, her tone low. James's pulse quickened. He had known that the consequences would be swift, but the tension in her voice suggested something more serious than just a reprimand. "What's this about?" he asked, trying to keep his composure. "Just follow me," Ava replied, her gaze flicking to Marcus, who was still standing nearby, watching the exchange. The sense of danger James had felt earlier now intensified. He couldn't shake the feeling that his actions had set off a chain of events that would change everything. James followed Ava through the crowded courtyard, his mind racing with questions. The unease from earlier hadn't subsided, and now it was compounded by the captain's summons. He knew the consequences of stepping out of line, but he had done what he thought was right. He couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake. He had seen something in Marcus's eyes, fear and gratitude mixed together. But what if the thugs returned, more vicious than before? What if Marcus, an elderly man, was targeted again? The weight of his decision sat heavy on his shoulders as they made their way toward the discreet entrance. Ava led him down a narrow hallway, the tension palpable in the air. The closer they got to the captain's office, the harder it became to suppress the nerves. When they finally arrived, the door opened without a sound, revealing Captain Quinn standing with her arms crossed, her eyes narrowing as she took in James. Her face was unreadable, but the sharpness in her gaze sent a chill down his spine. "You left your post," she said calmly, but her voice held a bite. "Explain yourself." James squared his shoulders, trying to steady his breath. He had been trained for moments like this, but nothing could prepare him for the weight of the situation. "A veteran was being harassed," he replied, his voice unwavering. "He was in immediate danger. I intervened." The captain studied him for a moment, her gaze softening ever so slightly. But then, her eyes flicked to the courtyard. "The rules exist for a reason, James," she began, her voice lowering. "But I see your point. You stopped an assault." Relief washed over him briefly, but it was quickly replaced by the captain's next words. "You'll be placed under evaluation," she added. "Continue your duties, but you'll be monitored." James nodded, accepting the consequences. He understood the need for protocol, but for the first time, he felt torn. He had followed his instincts, and now he was paying the price. But what was it all worth if he couldn't protect those who needed it? As he turned to leave the office, Ava caught his eye. "Be careful," she said quietly, her concern etched across her face. "They might not be done with you yet." James's heart sank. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The thugs had retreated once, but there was still danger lurking. His thoughts were interrupted by Quinn's voice, sharp as ever. "Back to your post, Holt," she said firmly. "We're watching you." With a heavy sigh, James nodded and turned back toward the courtyard. The weight of the situation was far from over. He knew he had to stay vigilant. There was more to come. The danger wasn't just from the thugs, it was from the consequences that followed his every decision. And James was just beginning to understand the full cost of his actions. James couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. As the evening drew near, he found himself pacing outside the guard station, his mind replaying the events over and over. The thugs had returned. He knew they were going to. They had been watching, and now their intentions were clearer than ever. He couldn't help but wonder what they were planning next. Marcus was still vulnerable. He had to keep his promise to protect him. The buzzing in his pocket broke his thoughts. His phone lit up with a message from Marcus. "They're back. I saw them outside. Please, don't ignore me this time." The words hit James like a gut punch. His worst fears had come true. Without wasting a second, he grabbed his gear and rushed out of the station, sprinting toward Marcus's building. The darkness was closing in, and the streets seemed eerily quiet, almost too quiet. As he turned the corner near Marcus's building, he could feel his pulse quickening. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. He reached the alley behind the building and found Marcus standing there, cane in hand, looking out into the street. "James, I've been trying to reach you," Marcus said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "They were here again. They've been watching me, and I don't think they'll stop until they get what they want." Before James could respond, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. His heart raced. "Stay behind me," he ordered, positioning himself in front of Marcus. The thugs were closing in, their footsteps growing louder. As James scanned the darkened alley, he could feel his senses sharpening. The moment they stepped into view, he was ready. The leader, a burly figure, came into the light first, followed by the two others. The same men who had harassed Marcus earlier. "You're still here?" One of the thugs sneered, eyeing Marcus. "You should have stayed home, old man." James's jaw clenched as he stepped forward, his posture stiff with authority. "Leave him alone," he commanded, his voice low and unwavering. The leader smirked, stepping closer to Marcus. "Or what? You gonna stop us again?" James didn't hesitate. He lunged forward faster than they expected, and in a blur of motion, he disarmed the leader with a swift twist of his arm, sending him stumbling backward. The other two thugs tried to rush in, but James was already a step ahead. He spun, delivering a series of precise moves that left the two men disoriented, unable to react. Within seconds, they were on the ground, incapacitated. Marcus watched, awestruck, as James handled the thugs effortlessly. The man had been protecting him, just as he had promised. But the danger wasn't over. More footsteps echoed down the alley, this time coming from a distance. James didn't waste time. He grabbed Marcus's arm, urging him to move quickly. "Get inside," he said urgently. "I'll deal with them." The thugs had been dealt with for now, but James knew the situation was far from over. They might not be finished with Marcus, and the longer they were left unchecked, the more danger they would pose. The night was far from over, and James couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Thank you for joining us for this incredible story. What you just saw was not only a testament to the strength and discipline of the Royal Guard, but also a reminder of the power of doing what's right, no matter the cost. James Holt's decision to break protocol and protect a fellow human being shows us that sometimes the rules are meant to be challenged when it comes to honor and morality. But we want to hear from you. What do you think about James's actions? Do you think he was right to step out of his post and risk his standing in the royal guard to protect Marcus? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between following the rules or standing up for what's right? Let us know in the comments below. Also, where are you watching from today? It's always interesting to see how far these stories travel around the world. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. We've got more incredible stories like this one, full of courage, heart, and unexpected moments. Make sure you're here tomorrow for our next amazing story.